Thanks, Scott, for the kind introduction, and we hope to have a very energy-filled and impactful panel following the lunch. So by show of hands, we have to do a little exercise after lunch. By show of hands, who knows what an apprenticeship is in the room? Okay, so a few people don't. So an apprenticeship, it combines both workplace and classroom-based experience. And we're going to talk much more on the panel about what's happening in the US, but also what's happening abroad. Looking at the sort of international OECD context, apprenticeships really gained a lot of attraction after the 2009 global financial crisis, because those countries which had maintained a relatively low youth unemployment rate were the countries that had a very robust and strong apprenticeship. So here we're thinking about Germany, we're thinking about Austria, we're thinking about Switzerland. So that's really where they gained a lot of attention, and we really see quite a lot of variation across the OECD in terms of the use of apprenticeships. So we're going to dig a lot more into detail in this panel about, how do you link young people to apprenticeships, what works and what doesn't. So I'll start just briefly by introducing the panel. So first we have Oliver Schärli, who's the head of labor market and unemployment insurance with the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs from Switzerland. Of course, Switzerland is always held up as a best practice when we look at apprenticeships. After we have Candy Chambers, who's the executive director with Direct Employers Association. We have then Stephen Dodds from IBM, which is great to come and give the employer perspective as well. And then Jacob Moss, who's the CEO of West Michigan Works, and then Marty Leathers, Director of Workforce Development from Missouri Economic Development. So how we're going to structure the panel is we're going to start with Oliver Schärli, who will give a presentation about the Swiss apprenticeship system and how it works, and then we'll have a chat amongst our panelists from there. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Oliver up to deliver his presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about the Swiss system of vocational education and training. Also, I'm thankful for this spot to talk to you about this issue of big importance here in Switzerland. Although I have to admit, in Switzerland, this spot after lunch would not be the favorite one. In Switzerland, we have a very known disease called Swiss coma, starting after lunch until about 4 p.m. So I hope this disease is not here. I'd like to start with a quote that, as it's been said, is from Benjamin Franklin, and this quote says a lot about the philosophy of our Swiss vocational education and training system. I will come back later on. My goal is to tell you in brief what the system is, how it works, and what are the key factors that it works so well so far. And I think in the panel afterwards we can also discuss some of the challenges we face with this system. One of the most important things is that although vocational education and training is a common mission, we share it with 3 partners. You have the Confederation, that means the central government of Switzerland, which is responsible for the strategic management, for the development of all the training and education methods, and also helps finance the system with a lower share. I will come back to that soon. Then a second partner are the cantons, so the states. The local governments, they're responsible for the implementation and for the supervision of the vocational schools. They run and finance these vocational schools, issue accreditation to host companies, and provide young people and adults with vocational and career guidance counseling. The third partner is by far the most important partner. It's the private sector, it's the companies, and the trade and branch associations. And one of my goals will also be to explain to you why private companies are willing to participate in this public-private partnership, because for us this is not something that's normal. It's quite exceptional that companies are ready to invest so much of their resources to vocational training and education. But they get something back in return, of course. If not, they would not be ready to invest. Maybe I should mention one last thing, that is this partnership, and that's quite important, is based on long traditions in Switzerland. As is the autonomy of the private sector, as is the sharing of power and the principle of cooperation. So that's what I always tell people, for example, in OECD, when we talk about apprenticeships and the implementing of apprenticeship models in countries that do not know this today. This is not something you can do overnight. You need to have confidence, you need to have trust between local, central governments and the private sector. And that is something you have to build up over time. I think that's quite important to know. What you see here is a slightly simplified model of the Swiss education system. Yes, we like it sometimes very complicated. So I assure you this is already simplified. But the only thing I want to tell you here is that also our vocational education and training system is fully integrated in this education system. That's one of the strengths this system has. I will come back to this right now. Our children normally have to do first compulsory school up to the age of between 15 and 16. All children visit these compulsory schools, and then they have to choose between two paths. One is general education, and the end could be there after some years that you apply for a university or a university with applied sciences. And the other path would be you go to vocational education and training, and you get a professional really soon. And in Switzerland, and I think that's quite something that is not normal to say so, 2/3 of children choose after compulsory school the vocational way, the vocational path. But it's also important to highlight that whatever path you choose, there's no dead end. So you can always choose to go to university even after you choose the vocational path, which is the path with the red boxes here. So the Swiss system offers numerous training possibilities and qualifications on both these levels that you see here. And both levels of training are very important in terms of ensuring an adequate supply of skilled workers for the Swiss economy. In Switzerland up to date, the vocational education and training system enjoys quite a huge prestige and has a solid reputation so far. You can choose, as a young adult, you can choose from about 230 different occupations, which is quite nice. So if you choose the vocational education and training path, you can become a mechanical engineer, a cook, a healthcare professional, commercial employee. You can work as a retail salesman, saleswoman, as carpenter, IT professional. So you see quite a wide range of occupations you can choose from. And most of these programs, most of these trainings and education trainings are taken in the form of apprenticeships, which last between 2 and 4 years depending on the occupation you choose. In the end, young people get a federally recognized diploma, a qualification, which allows them to enter the labor market immediately. Most of the time, young adults are then in the age of 18, 19, probably 20. What I already mentioned is one of the strengths of the system is the permeability of the system. And this permeability is almost complete. So you can always choose different education pathways also on the way. So all the further education and career options will still be available later on, which is, I think, quite important for young people who have to choose a path. So while most young people choose to enter the labor market after their apprenticeship, they still have all the options for further education and training afterwards, even to go to university and have a university degree at the end, if they wish so. I think I will not go into detail here. One thing I'd like to mention is, as I already said, which is really important, there are no dead-end qualifications anywhere in the systems. You can always develop further if you like so. And this permeability greatly contributes to the attractiveness of the system in Switzerland and attracts strong students, not only for universities but also for the vocational education and training pathway, and that's quite important. Another key factor is the duality in theory and in practice in this system. What young people learn is what companies need on the labor market. That's what we call labor market orientation. So this is not some theory the learners learn in schools, but it's very based on reality, what economy needs and what helps boost productivity in the Swiss economy. So most education and training within the Swiss system is based on the so-called dual track model. That is the combination of theory in school and practice in companies. What does that mean? That means that young people who choose the VET paths, they have to apply for an apprenticeship position within a company, just like any other employee. And once they secure an apprenticeship contract, they will start working there, and at the same time be practically trained by experienced professionals. So in a typical week, 3 days of the week, the learners, the apprentice, work in the company and help produce things, real products in the real economy. And 2 other days they go to school and learn the theory behind the real production. And there are also some programs where they can meet other learners from other companies, but that's more focused on several branches. Also the teachers, even the teachers in the schools, are not normal teachers, I'd say, but these are teachers that only work part-time as teachers. Most of the time they are in companies, working in companies. So they bring all their knowledge, all their skills into the schools, so that theory is not just theory, but it's something very concrete, something you can work with, and you can make the relations between what you did produce in the company and what you learn theoretically in schools. Also, what makes this system very attractive is that up until today, apprentices who choose the dual vocational education training system are very attractive for the Swiss labor market. As you can see here, they're even more attractive than people with a university degree. The downside of this slide is that people also in Switzerland don't know this fact. That's a shame. I will come now, probably in the discussion I will come back to this. We have a problem with parents. Parents always think that you need a university degree to get successful and to get high wages, high salaries in the world of economy in Switzerland, which is simply not true, as you can see here in this slide. one thing you should also know that in Switzerland we pay a lot of attention to the education of our youngest. That means we have some very high goals. We want that 95% of all our young people get a degree or a qualification. And we're about at, I think, some above 90%. So there's a path to go, but we're quite well already there. And I think that has to do with this permeability and high employability the system guarantees for young people. Now, as you can imagine, nothing is for free. There's no such thing as free lunch. And this system is not only complex, but very costly too. But also here you can see that we are really in a public-private partnership, because most of the expenses come from the private sector. 60%, over 5 billion Swiss francs every year, are paid by the private sector. And the rest is divided between the local government and the central government. All in all, this system costs way more than 8 billion Swiss francs every year, but it's worth it, as I will try to show you right now. You can see it here. Over 5 billion francs is what private companies have to invest in this system, but they get a net benefit. As you can see here, half a billion is net benefit that companies can take out of this system. Why is that so?
Pourquoi est-ce que c'est cela? Pourquoi est-ce que les compagnies bénéficient de ce système? Il y a deux réponses. Une, c'est
in apprenticeship training. And the learners who they engage, who they give a job to, they perform productive tasks within the company. I think, I'm not sure, but I think most of these apprenticeships, the apprentices are profitable for the company after the second year. So already there you see the net benefit of a company. But there's a second benefit companies have, because after the apprenticeships, they are free to hire their apprentices. And so they can avoid costly recruitment costs associated with hiring external workers and processing job applications, which can be a real big benefit, especially today, as also in Switzerland we have some skills shortages. So, to summarize what I just said, we call this dual FED system a win-win-win situation, because everyone is profiting, everyone benefits from this system. The individuals, it is the young people, the companies, and also government, society. It's for all a winning situation. I'll leave that one out. So I hope I could show you what are the key features of the Swiss vocational education training system. First of all, it is that it's a public-private partnership, that the companies are really and strongly involved in the system. That's, for me, it's the key factor. If companies are not ready to invest in this system, it makes no sense to have this system. It needs the companies, and it needs the investment of the companies. Second, permeability, which is very important for the children, the young adults, and their parents. You have to show them that whatever path you choose, you are never going to end in a dead end, never. Thirdly is the labor market orientation. As these learners work in private companies, that they produce real things, they're very close to the labor market, and also the trainings and educations are very near to the production reality in the economy. And as I tried to show you, it's also cost efficient. So at the end, everyone benefits, even the companies who pay quite a large amount to this system. allow me one last remark. It's this system that I showed you is you have to know that it's a system that is perfectly designed for Switzerland. So I don't think if you want to implement this system, you'd have to adopt it to the circumstances that you see in your countries. But in general, I can strongly say this system works. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Oliver, for that informative presentation. So I mean, I certainly took away the point you were also making about the sort of benefits at the end of the day of an apprenticeship versus a higher education. I look within my own family, you know, my brother-in-law is an electrician. And he probably, I mean, he makes just as much money as I do, and he's far more handy around the house than I am. So, you know, there's this benefit as well. But we'll turn to our panelists. So, Candy, we'll start with you. So, if you could just provide us a bit of background on what is Direct Employers Association, what's the work you're doing, and what are some of the challenges you see from your membership in terms of promoting apprenticeships, and what are some of the benefits you see from the employer perspective?
Direct employers, we're not
Sorry,
a staffing agency.
the microphone.
Oh, I hate microphones.
Yeah, translation.
I know, I'm sorry. I feel uncomfortable holding. Anyway, I apologize for that. Direct Employers is not a staffing agency. We actually are a nonprofit trade association, and we are a major partner with NASWA. So that's why we're here, and we participate in a lot of things they do, and they participate in a lot of things we do. So we're part of the public-private partnership with them. And as a result of our partnership, we created the National Labor Exchange, which we like to call the superhighway of jobs in the United States. So.
Donc ceci a commencé avec en 2007, on a commencé ce programme.
IBM is one of them, some of the major organizations in the country. So given that, we actually help them meet their obligations as federal contractors or companies that do business with the federal government. And so they have regulatory obligations that we assist them with, and that aligns with the work with the states and the state workforce agencies, because we have to send jobs to those personnel to allow for priority protected veteran referrals for our veteran population. So we have a great patriotic group at both organizations, and we try to help our veterans in any way we can. And then we also have a wholly owned for-profit subsidiary that develops accessible career websites and does accessibility audits and does employer branding. And so we work with a lot of companies. We do creative services. We work with a lot of companies, helping them find job seekers and helping them find qualified employees to take their jobs. So that being said, you would think everybody would want to have an apprenticeship. And some of the major challenges that I see on a daily basis, and IBM is one of the big companies, and Microsoft and Amazon and all of those companies have apprenticeships because they have the money, they have the desire, and they have the real need. And you know, our unemployment rate is at an all-time low, and so it's hard to find people that are willing to leave their current position to go to another company. And employers are basically having to steal from other companies. So the one thing I picked up, though, Oliver, in your presentation was just the talent development culture. At least that's what I picked up on in Switzerland. And, you know, I've been reading a lot. Companies that have a talent development culture, especially among the millennial population, have people that want to stay at that company because there's an ingrained opportunity for them to grow and the upward mobility. And, you know, we always joke around. I used to teach generational differences. And we all, you know, kind of joked around about the millennials. You know, they would walk in and next week they want to be CEOs. But that's not really true, but they want to get ahead. And what's wrong with that? We all wanted to be there at some point in our upward mobility of our own. We wanted to do better. We wanted to, get ahead and that sort of thing. For some reason, we just focus on that with them. But apprenticeships are a great way to give them a reason to learn new skills, help your organizations when you have technologies or departments that are going to have to be riffed. I mean, how many of you have been through a reduction in force? A lot of people, I'm sure, and some of those people could maybe be reskilled through an apprenticeship to help them learn new skills and, be a valuable contributing member of that organization. I'm not sure we're right there yet, though, with that talent development culture that I think is necessary. I know there are some states, Chicago, the city of Chicago in Illinois, they have a Chicago Apprentice Network, and they have organizations that are working with the city of Chicago to develop apprenticeships. And we have some state representatives up here, and they're doing the same thing. But there's a lot that people don't know, and I think the states need to reach out to those organizations. I will tell you, apprenticeships have been around for a while, but the subject of them has just come up in the last several years. And, to the point where people are actually talking about it and having conversations about it. It's very similar to a co-op program. You look at a pipeline problem or a situation where you're going to lose a lot of retirees. When I was at American Electric Power for 22 years in Ohio, I was telling the guy from Colorado earlier, there's rural areas and there's people that don't want to leave their rural areas. So what do? How do they find those jobs? And you have to partner with the community colleges and the organizations nearby. And I don't think we're quite there yet, and that's where the states, I think, can do a lot to help.
Great. So that's, I think that leads quite nicely to Marty. I mean, you're working at the state level in Missouri. So, I mean, what are some of the things you're doing and some of the thinking you're doing on apprenticeships in the state of Missouri?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be up here, and it's exciting to hear both the European and the U.S. models that are in play. For us in Missouri, we've really taken hold of apprenticeships over the last 3 years, and we've made it a core component of our strategy for talent development and really cultivating that resilience in our labor force. The one thing we say out front is it's not a silver bullet, right? We haven't scaled this enough yet that it's solving all of our challenges in the labor market, but it certainly is one of the strongest arrows in our quiver. Missouri, we're proud that we just finished the federal fiscal year, which ended September 30th, as second in the nation, only to California. Kudos to my California friends, but in Missouri we have a bigger hill to climb, I think, with funding and other things. So we're pretty proud of the apprentices that we created over the last year in Missouri, which was over 10,543. Not that we count or anything, but we care a lot about that because that's a lot of people who now are in a job or in a job they weren't in before because of an apprenticeship program. We have over 3,600 employers participating in apprenticeships in Missouri, and we have almost 16,000 registered apprentices active currently. That doesn't put us in the leading the nation as far as active apprentices. A lot of states have more apprentices than we do, but we're growing. And what's really exciting is for us, it's a partnership model. We talk a lot about how do we come up with a solution that requires employers, businesses on the private sector side, as well as government education to come to the table. And it's unique that we actually can get everyone to actually come together and create that kind of nexus point where we connect, rather than kind of operating in silos or maybe in some sort of linear fashion with milestones. Apprenticeships help us do that because without an employer, we don't have apprenticeships. So it brings employers to the table. It kind of flips the model where everything we develop moves backwards from the needs of the employer. And then we start day one with the apprentice being employed, and then work to develop that employee after the employee has been enrolled in the apprenticeship program. That's really exciting because in our traditional education pathways, the job is kind of the afterthought, right? The idea is to prepare you for that job, but it's we've all heard kind of the hope and pray, right? The train and pray models, and this tries to get us around that a little bit more, and it kind of allows us to attach earlier on. So we're really excited about apprenticeships in Missouri. I think for us also, We've been successful. We've done this all with federal funds through the expansion. You heard the Assistant Secretary of Labor talk about the commitment that USDOL has had. We've been a huge recipient of that. We've now had 4 rounds of what began as the Apprenticeship USA grant dollars. We also were able to get a few other grants that helped us do this. And really what we're doing is we don't pay for wages. We don't pay for any of the costs of the employer to manage the on-the-job training and the mentoring. But we pay for the RTI, and we stand up the intermediaries. And that intermediary point, as again you heard earlier today, is extremely critical. Our entire framework is based around standing up our intermediaries. All of our success, the 10,543 apprentices, and the expansion, the growth we had, has not came because state government has done something exciting or that even education has came with a solution, but it's because we've partnered and facilitated a network of intermediaries. And those intermediaries that we've helped empower and stand up in Missouri really are our community colleges, our career and technical high schools, so it would be our K-12 in vocational technical schools in Missouri, as well as our local workforce development boards. And so Ron and all of his clients and our clients too, we have 14 workforce boards across the state that we work closely with, 30 job centers that we're able to use as access points to engage in apprenticeship programs. And then of course employer-led models, like we partner with IBM, who has a model that they've created, and next week we're going to actually recognize them as the partner of the year for us, the employer of the year, if you will, for apprenticeships, because IBM's doing some amazing stuff in Missouri that I know we'll hear about in a moment. But we're real excited about that because, again, what it is changing the conversation, and it's allowing us to kind of think different, think of alternative pathways other than more of the linear formal education mindset. The last thing I'll say before I pass the mic, because I don't want to hog the stage, is that, you know, I heard a lot about, and I appreciate hearing that if Switzerland is having challenges with changing the hearts and minds of parents, then that makes me feel a little bit better, because if that model is having the same uphill climb that we are, then that means there's hope for us yet. And so we're going to continue to do that. But the other piece is what we call this whole effort, this whole initiative over the last 2 years since I've been engaged has really been called, it's our quest to modernize and expand apprenticeship programs. We have great relationships with skilled trades. And so those programs, it's not about replacing those programs, it's about supplementing those programs. In Missouri, we have about 10,000, 11,000 of our apprentices are in the skilled trades or with the traditional labor management organizations, and we love that partnership. We want them to grow, but we have a pretty ambitious goal of 25,000 apprentices by 2025, and we know that we can't rely only on labor to burden that. So for us, it's about modernizing, expanding, and so we've added 3,600 apprenticeships in things like healthcare, finance, what we're calling technology instead of IT these days, education. So these modern sectors, these, we don't like to say non-traditional anymore, but really non-traditional apprenticeship sectors where we're seeing a ton of growth. So for us, that flywheel's moving, and we're really excited about the progress that we're seeing.
Thanks. So maybe we'll turn to Stephen. So, I mean, what's the business case for IBM for offering apprenticeships? And can you talk a bit more about what you're doing in terms of offering tech apprenticeships?
Thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about IBM and why we have an apprenticeship program. Where did it start, and what's the ROI today for us? Well, basically, it started in the prior administration when they started the American Apprenticeship Initiative. And underneath that, President Obama's had this program called 21st Century Apprenticeships, like moving apprenticeships from the traditional trade jobs into high-tech, information technology, health, IT, and advanced manufacturing. I was part of that working group that started that. And then in 2016, November 2016, after the election, our chairwoman and president and CEO, Jenny Rometty, wrote an open letter to then President-elect Trump, basically saying, Mr. President-elect, you need to address the skill shortage in this country, because if you don't, we're never going to be able to get to your economic objectives that you're talking about. And she coined a new phrase called new-collar jobs. Everyone's heard about that if you Google it, new-collar jobs. And she defined a new-collar job as a job that doesn't require a 4-year degree. Now, we heard a lot this morning about the future of workforce and how do we address those skills. And that's IBM at that point. How do we move forward? How do we address that skill gap? And how do we get there for that future workforce? So I was a part of that working group, and I talked to our senior VP of HR. It said, underneath this umbrella of new-collar jobs, we could develop a work-based learning program, the gold standard being apprenticeships programs in information technology. And we decided to do a federal program. We register a program with the Department of Labor, John Ladd and his team. And our objective for developing apprenticeship programs is to open that pipeline aperture. Now, apprenticeships are not going to take the place of somebody else who's got a 4-year degree in software engineering, computer science, or information systems. What it does, though, if you open that pipeline aperture, it gives a company like IBM, Amazon, and other companies another talent pipeline to develop. So we're developing our skill sets in-house. So we started in November of 2017, our first cohort of software engineers. We're a federal registered program. We have 25 job roles registered with the U.S. Department of Labor. We're across multiple states. Our state with the most number of apprentices is Missouri, Columbia, Missouri, with 100 there. Our first cohort was 7 software engineers. Today, we're at 400 across the U.S., probably growing by 400 in the next few years. Our job roles, they're competency-based. Most of them are a year long. We created a data scientist role, which is 2 years long. And we're looking to expand those across the U.S. Now, as we go forward here and look at these individuals, the type of individuals we're recruiting, we specifically want individuals who do not have a 4-year degree. Now, it doesn't mean to say that we're not recruiting anyone with a 4-year degree, but we're after those who don't. So our apprentices range from age 19 to 59. There were a Starbucks barista. There was a dairy farmer in Poughkeepsie, New York. Lots of veterans. And one thing it brings to the table as well, a great diversity of apprentices, because we're out there and we're able to work with the local job centers. In fact, in Missouri and Columbia, when we have a new requisition of new hires for apprentices, we'll work with the community college, and we'll work with the local workforce board, and actually have career fairs to find that talent. So think about that future apprentice, maybe he's a diamond in the rough, right? And a work-based learning program that will bring them in to be a software engineer, will bring them in to be cybersecurity, application development, we have human resources, we have network systems engineers, and we're developing the talent. And part of the feedback that we're getting, which I think is coming from our managers, is that the managers after our first cohort, those software engineers, at the end of that, they decided to make full-time offers to all their apprentices. And those managers decided that the apprentices, after a year of work-based learning, were actually worth the same salary as hiring a software engineer from Duke University. Now that says a lot, because that is giving those opportunities to that workforce, that diverse pipeline, to individuals who wouldn't not necessarily have that opportunity. And I'll talk later about opportunities, what we're doing, because one thing we do want to do, and our chairman wants to do, is we want to provide our subject matter expertise, our artifacts, to other companies so that they can establish apprenticeship programs using standards that we've already registered. And we're willing to offer that up and help companies do that, and I'll talk about later on.
Yeah, if I could even ask a follow-up question. So you mentioned, you have 2 programs around software engineer and then one around data scientist, if I understood correctly.
Well, we have 25 job roles. I've just named a couple of those.
Okay, but they're mostly 1 to 2 year programs. So my question is that something that you had to work with the federal government on in terms of curriculum and program design, and how was that process, in terms of, it's a program that you're offering, so how did it go working with the federal government to really create a company standard? So
I'll give a shout out to the Department of Labor, John Ladd, and Office of Apprenticeships. Is that they did a good job. So apprenticeships for the trade go back to 1934 Fitzgerald Act, right? Okay. And if you read those Code of Federal Regulations, you'll see pages of competencies and standards and provisions of a trade. So how does a company like IBM develop a software engineering program? Well, you're literally, you're hammering a square peg into a round hole, right? But to kudos to DOL, they let us do it. Now, what you're talking about, John, is we decided through our subject matter experts in software engineering, all the other job roles, what were those competencies, because we're a competency-based apprenticeship program, what was it that those skill sets, the education, and in the case of apprenticeship, related technical instruction, and what was it that the managers, our subject matter, said we need from a software engineer, application developer, or a data scientist? From that, we developed those standards, those competencies. It's all competency-based. And an apprentice, when they enter the program, they have to show that to a mentor, that they've mastered that competency, and that gets checked off. There's different ways to show mastery. It can be show, do, tell, whatever the case may be. But once they've gone through that, then the mentor and the manager can check those competencies off. So basically, John, long answer, but it was our standards. We developed what we wanted to do to make sure that apprentice, that job role, at the end, they had the skill sets that we wanted to do.
Great. That's really, really interesting. So we'll turn to Jacob. So if you could tell us a bit what's happening within your local WIB, West Michigan Works, and what you're doing to promote apprenticeships.
Yep, my pleasure. It's always fun going last, right? Is that you get the pressure of underwhelming everyone after everyone else has talked really well about apprenticeships. So in West Michigan, we cover 7 counties, approximately 1.3 million in population. Our largest counties being 600,000 population, smallest being 60,000. So we have the interesting dichotomy of urban versus rural that some of you had talked about earlier, and some of the challenges that our rural counties face. We jumped into apprenticeships about 5 years ago, so it seems like we're the second largest veteran, I think, at the stage right now. Switzerland's probably been doing it for a number of years, right? But for us, it was really just the need, right? Is that we knew that unemployment was extremely low in West Michigan. Our metropolitan statistical area shows we're less than 3% at some points in time, which most economists will say that's full employment, right? But we don't feel full employment because we see 40,000 job seekers a year. We have 8 full American Job Centers and several satellite centers. So we know that there's a need, right? And when you start to dissect some of the data, there's higher needs in certain demographics than other needs. And so working with our employers, we tried to be strategic. We convened them. We heard some of the discussion this morning about industry councils. And that's what we really did, is that we wanted to convene those industry councils for them to tell us what some of your challenges that you were faced with. And those employers were heavily engaged and are still engaged today. And our industry councils are healthcare, IT, manufacturing, construction, and agribusiness. Those are the key industries that we see continuing to grow in West Michigan, and employers continuing to expand. And so jumping into apprenticeships, we started with the healthcare consortium. So traditional apprenticeships, we think of construction and manufacturing, but I'm glad to see IT's here, representative, and Marty tied it up for me nice to talk about healthcare. Our largest employer in West Michigan has 30,000 employees in healthcare. By far our largest IT employer with 1,000 employees, and that's Spectrum Health. They hire 120 people a week, so most of our employers in the region aren't 120 employees. So they have some interesting challenges, and one of the commonalities between Spectrum, Mercy Health, which is a part of Trinity Health, a larger healthcare system, and Cherry Street Health Services, more of a local healthcare network, was that they were having a hard time with medical assistants, right? Really struggling with getting them, enough of them coming through the current structures that were in place for individuals to get credentials. And we said, the employer said, well, why don't we try to do apprenticeships? Why don't we try to, there's some grants and funds and resources. And we said, absolutely, that sounds great. And they say, well, we want you to hold the sponsor. And we said, okay, what does that mean? And so we didn't even know if we could do it at the time, right? Because not from our research that there were not many workforce development boards actually holding the sponsorship. But what we did know is that we were used to the bureaucracy of Department of Labor, and I could say that now because I think John's gone, right? Is that we are used to auditing, programmatic and fiscal. We deal with it on a day-to-day basis. We're used to credentials and standards and all that fun stuff that go along with accountability as it relates to reporting. And so we said, yeah, let's try it. So we worked with our local Department of Labor rep, and they told us no. And so we were back to, okay, what do we do now? And we pushed back a little bit and said, let's give it a try. Our employers really want us to do it, and they let us do it. And so we've been doing it for 5 years now. Each year we get I think there's about 35 slots that are available for this next year. So we're not as big as Missouri statewide, obviously. We're a small region. But the employers feel like they're getting higher quality of candidate because they're heavily invested on the front end. They pay for their wages, which is nice because we don't have to cover the full cost, much like Marty had talked about with wages and employers investing in it. So they're heavily invested in it. And then we help cover the training costs through a variety of grants. We actually had some outside organizations, AHIMA, the Association of Health Information Management, gave us some funds to help cover some of the costs of supports that an individual might need with uniform and books and other things that might not be covered under under traditional grants, and we've seen some major success. One of my favorite stories is last year I was at a graduation, and one of the apprentices was there to celebrate the current apprentices as they graduated. And I said, tell me about your experience. What did you like? What were some of the challenges that you faced? And she said, I absolutely love my experience. Is that I feel like I've been working at the company for 2 years now, even though she was only an employee for 1 full year. And I said, well, what are you doing now? And she said, I'm continuing on to get my nursing degree. And that's really what we want, right? Is that we want to create that spark of lifelong learning, much like the Switzerland model, is that we see that, it's not just a one and done, that it's not just that short-term credential. It's, as they as they get into that company, they can take advantage of tuition reimbursement then and other supports that employer might have for them to be successful long-term. And that's what it's all about. How do we spark that lifelong learner? Somebody that didn't think that they could be successful, it's somebody that might have defaulted on their student loans and didn't think they could qualify for grants and other assistance, or somebody that they just didn't see themselves in healthcare. Much like we had talked about at this stage, is that there are individuals in other occupations and industries that they don't even know how to get into IT or healthcare. And so since starting with this model, we now have 22 apprenticeship programs. We have over 100 apprentices and 40 employers that we're working with. But probably my biggest takeaway from this morning with Oliver's presentation, or this afternoon with Oliver's presentation, is that the value on employers, right, is that we have to have strong relationships and partnerships with those employers in order for these initiatives to be successful. Because if they're not invested into it and they're not buying into it, and they're not engaged in it, then we can do all we want as far as training and skilling, and it is that hoping piece at the end, that we hope you do good, and we hope you get a job in an area that you spend all this time in. But apprenticeships are those things that, you're 2 days on site, you're 2 days off site learning, and you get 1 day to study or work. It really keeps the job seeker engaged and feel like they're part of that culture of that organization and the employers investing in them. So it really has been a successful initiative for us.
Great. And Candy, I want to come back to you. So, thinking back to Oliver's presentation, what were some of your key takeaways about the Swiss model from his presentation, and lessons learned for the U.S. system?
Well, I actually thought a lot about the vocational side of it. We were just talking at lunch. It's not working. All right. Okay. Thank you. See, I told you I don't like these things. Somebody's taking care of me back there. We were just talking at lunch. The vocational programs in the United States are pretty much going away. But we were sitting there speaking with someone from the American Federation for Teachers, and she said, but they're coming back. And I think that's a mentality that people in the United States have to get away from, because so many of us, I was just telling someone this morning, when my children were little, we never talked about if you go to college, it was where you're going to college. I mean, from infancy, it was like where you go to school. What we tend to forget is that some of the vocational positions pay 6 figures. I mean, a plumber makes a lot of money, or an electrician, like you said, your brother-in-law makes a lot of money. And those are respectable jobs. And, we tend to forget about that, and the jobs that don't require 4-year degrees. I mentioned for veterans that drove tanks in the war, and, they come back here and try to get a job as a truck driver, and they have to have that CDL, the commercial driver's license. Really? They drove a tank, for goodness sakes, And we have to get out of that mentality here in the United States, and I think it will get there, but it's very slow and moving. And the one thing, I was listening to everybody, and we've got 2 state people, and then IBM, a very large organization. And as I said before, we have big companies that have the people on staff and have the knowledge that is needed, and the, just the thought process to create the apprenticeship or an internship or a co-op program, and they have the money to do it. And, that's the part, every company that we work with, they have travel budgets, they have issues, they can't do certain things, and we're kind of overlooking the expense that the creation of an apprenticeship program requires, and they only look at it in a certain way. So what I'm getting at is, they're going to spend the money recruiting anyway. right? So why not build your own pipeline internally and develop it the way you want and teach them what they need to know for your organization? You know, to me it's a no-brainer, but trying to get to the right person at the organization to have that discussion. And what we see as well, and what I've seen in the some of the well-developed apprenticeship programs, they have kind of a steering committee that oversees how the apprenticeship program is developed, is designed, who the partners are, and who handles the cost. But that's usually made up of business representatives and HR people. Well, we see every day that there are HR people that are either coming in just because they got tired in their old department, they know nothing about HR, or they're getting out because they're so tired of being in HR. And so there's an influx all the time. And, you know, we need to find organizations that really realize that they have a problem. A lot of their, you know, important positions are they're losing people because of being at retirement age. I mentioned I work for an electric utility. We had a voluntary downsizing one time, and in one day we lost 71,000 years of experience. That's a lot of time, and we had an up or out program for line mechanics, because your older line mechanics don't want to or cannot continue to climb poles. You don't think about that, but you got to do something because you need to have line mechanics, you know. So you have to have that person in your organization, the leader that's going to have that buy-in, who's going to say, we got a problem, we got to fix this, let's try an apprenticeship. And to the States, I'll tell you what, companies are very anxious to have some guidance, and there's a lot of opportunity. I loved what you said, Jacob, about the industry councils. That would be great to get some industry councils in the States and try to get that discussion started.
So if I may address a couple of things that Ken, you said, is that, so even though we're a large company and we do have some resources, it's an expensive program, but what we found, we're giving all of our assets away, and I'll talk about a model here in a second with the Wake Tech. But one thing employers need to do is that if HR in some of the companies, if they don't recognize that not every job position that I have that says a 4-year degree, if they don't go back and revalidate that they actually need a 4-year degree, then they're never going to change, and they'll never change the requirements. You'll never get the employees on board. So that's number one. HR really has to do, and that's what we did. We went through, we looked at all our positions, or job description positions, and decide which ones don't have to have a 4-year degree. And today, if you go out to IBM.com jobs, you'll see most of our jobs will say high school required and associate's degree preferred. Now, obviously, there's jobs that require PhDs and all that, but if the employees don't start in HR, which is where you need to start, you're not going to recruit the apprentices.
Let me interrupt you real quick, but you're exactly right. But again, that goes right along with what I just said. HR and a lot of companies, they don't know what they don't know. And that's not a put down to the HR folks. It's just they're too new to the field, and they're young. They haven't grown up in HR like I did. And you're exactly right. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't realize that they have to go back and reevaluate those jobs.
And then to address, you know, how do I get other companies involved in this? Even large companies won't take the overhead, because if you read from the Department of Labor and some of the states as well, we won't go into the different state apprenticeship agencies, but there's this Code of Federal Regulations, Parts 29. And if you take that in a large company, those Code of Federal Regulations on an apprenticeship program, to the HR attorney, they will tell you to leave the office, right? Because they will not go down that path. So what we're doing, we work with the companies, and the model we're working with right now, so other companies, large or small, will start apprenticeship programs, because our chair wouldn't say, we're in this together, right? We have to address the skills match. Today, there's 500,000 IT jobs open across the U.S. There's 60,000 degrees awarded a year in computer science, software engineering, information system. It's never going to be there, right? We have to change that. So apprenticeship is that pipeline. So we'll work with Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh, and we'll work with some major employers down there, and they're going to adopt our apprenticeship standards for software engineering, mainframe system administration. And where that's going to work is they're going to be the sponsor of our standards, registered with the state. And then with these companies, they're going to pull in a cohort of individuals, come together, go through a pre-apprenticeship program, because in IT, something, you know, not everyone has the skills, right? A cohort of about 20, 25. Once they're done with the pre-apprenticeship program, they will then step into an apprenticeship with all these companies. Now, what that does, because Wake Tech is the sponsor, is that then the companies don't have to have the overhead. All they need to do is hire the apprentice, right? And that model, that's a lift and shift model. I'm working with also community college and other colleges to do that. The other thing we're doing, we work with the state of California, what will be announced next week. Talked about this morning about the aging population, especially in IT, and we're working with the California Department of Apprenticeship Standards, where next week they will announce an apprenticeship program for incumbent workers to step into an IBM-adopted mainframe system administration, because what's happening in state agencies is that they've got an aging workforce, a retiring workforce, and an apprenticeship program is a great way to transfer knowledge from an older workforce into another workforce on those type of technical skills. So that's going to be announced next week. And again, that's a model that can be lift and shift wherever. So we're out there. We'll give our standards. We'll help wherever we can. And the same model I said in Wake Tech, that can be the small, medium-sized employers, right? Come together where you only need 1 or 2 apprentices, but bring them together through the workforce board or through a workforce system, and with a community college, which is ideal, and then form a cohort, and then they can each go into the small companies and take that overhead, that administrative overhead, off of the companies.
Yeah, no, it's a great point about the small and medium-sized enterprises, because we often see, I mean, talking about HR function, many firms, especially micro, small, medium firms, have no HR planning function. And so the challenge for them is exponential compared to maybe a larger firm like IBM. So I wanted to turn to Oliver, and I mean, from the Swiss experience, what's worked and what doesn't work in terms of targeting SMEs and apprenticeship programs?
Not always. Not always. Well, let's not forget that it's voluntary to have an apprenticeship or not to have an apprenticeship. You're free to choose as a company, and there are also some small companies that choose not to offer apprenticeships, and that's okay. But normally, you know, in Switzerland we are not the land of honey and milk only, but we have some problems too. One problem we face right now is the demographic problems. Our population is growing older and older, and that's a real problem for our companies. Second, we have already in some branches we have this skills shortage. So companies have an interest to address these problems by investing in young people. So what we have today is really a war for talents, to say it in that way. Companies try to find the best young people they can to invest in them, and even for a small company, it pays. And in Switzerland, and I think it's the same here in the United States, companies, entrepreneurs, they know one thing. They know if you want to make a profit, you have to invest firsthand, and that's what they do. And I think the system, it has such a long tradition that I don't think there is a problem we haven't already faced and found some solutions. So the trust in the system, even from small companies, is big. So they trust in the system. They know it will pay, and so that's The only other choice they would have, and that's what they do sometimes, is to attract people from other countries, especially from Germany, from Austria, from Italy, France. And that's what they do sometimes. But if you do that, you have other problems. You may not have the people that have the right skills. Then there is the cultural problem. These people are not common with the culture in Switzerland, with how you work in Switzerland, because, as you may know, it's not only a cliche. It's that way in Switzerland. If someone tells you to come and start your work at 8 o'clock, it's not 8 o'clock and 5. It's at 8 o'clock. So if you come
to my office.
So you have to be there at time, or even some minutes before 8 o'clock. You know. And for us also to do our work properly is very, very important, because we pay high salaries. We're a country with high prices, but the quality has to be high too. So if the quality is not high or not high enough, the consumer is not ready to pay the price. And we see that often that people come from other countries, try to work in Switzerland, but they don't meet the expectations of the companies. For a big company, like IBM, also in Switzerland, that's not a problem. But for a small company with, say, 4 or 5 workers, if one of these workers is not working properly, that's a huge problem.
Right.
So if you invest in an apprentice, you can ensure that at the end you'll have someone who really knows the job and is worth the investment. And I think that's the most, that's a key factor for small and medium enterprises.
Jonathan, I just appreciate those comments, and I think for us, a statistic that was always very surprising to me is really, there's 2 of them. One is that our average, our employers that are engaged in apprenticeships, the amount of apprentices they have is 4. That's the average. So we're not talking about big scale. Now, we love the IBMs who come in and are able to do 100 apprentices, but the reality is most of our organizations that we're serving are about 100 employees, and maybe 4%, 3% of them might be an apprenticeship, and that's good for them. That's the right succession plan, that's the right model as they bring in kind of their new crop of supervisors or other leaders in the organization. The other thing that's really unique is that the average age of apprentices in Missouri is 29. And then as you look at different sectors, it actually, that's pulled down, frankly, by the skilled trades. If you look at some of your modern sectors that I described earlier, your healthcare and your technology sectors, that actually goes up to 36. So what we're seeing is people that have been in the workforce or haven't been in the workforce that need to be in the workforce who are now re-engaging in the workforce as a result of apprenticeship programs. And so that's actually been really helpful for us and kind of an interesting byproduct.
Great. Jacob, do you want to add anything in terms of West Michigan and SMEs?
Nope, I just support what Marty said.
Okay, sounds good. One of the issues I wanted to come back, and this is really just an open question to any of the panelists, is we know that the firm. We've talked a lot about the firm, but of course you also need people to participate in the programs. And in particular, I mean, you mentioned the numbers, the average age of being 29, but if we think of that 18 to 24-year-old cohort, coming out of a high school program or whatever it may be, I mean, how can we kind of change the hearts and minds of young people to recognize the value of that apprenticeships play?
So that's a challenge, and really, again, I would argue that the parents are harder to change than the young kids. I mean, I think especially technology stuff, right? They're savvy, they're into it. Digital natives, right? We have 5 generations in the workforce now, and we're about, the 5th is getting bigger, which could create 6. And what that means is we have more people that actually, they value doing work with their hands. They value actually building things and creating things, even if it's digital. What we've seen in Missouri, we've tried to attack the youth apprenticeship problem. A year ago, we had 19 apprentices throughout our high schools in Missouri, our 57 career and technical high schools. Now we have 316. We've really grown it a lot last year. And what's exciting is they're starting their junior year at age 16, and they're doing a 2-year co-op program where they're spending some time in the classroom and some time with employers. And it's very locally driven. And I think someone said earlier, I think it was a LinkedIn speaker, talked about how the skill sets that are needed are very localized, right, depending on those industries, those employers. And we found it exactly that as we work with the high schools engaging with the local employers to find those opportunities for apprentices and everything from like graphic design to banking to advanced manufacturing or construction. So for us, engaging the youth has been really important, and it's helping us because we look at over the last 22 years, we've really had a big gap in that 18 to 44 workforce. And it's more acute when you look at like 28 to 44. And so we know we've lost a lot of people over the years that now we're trying to make up. So at the same time of trying to retrain our adults and re-engage them with the workforce system, we're also trying to, on the front end, engage our youth.
I have 2 answers to your question, Jonathan. The first is not to be taken too seriously. I think Switzerland is a country that's very much Americanized, in the way that our young people, our youngest, they grow up with the American culture. So what they see and listen to music or in television, American music, American television series, they see if you want to be successful, you have to be A, a banker, B, a lawyer, C, an artist, or D, a criminal. Now, the incentive to go and do some vocational education and training, mixed, not to be taken too seriously. But the problem really is that you know, if you're talking about younger people in the age of 15, 16, that's when in Switzerland normally young people have to choose to go the pathway of vocational educational training. That's not easy. You have to face reality. You have to go, you have to find a job within a company. And then, okay, you get paid, but the salary is very low because you're an apprentice. You have to get up early, you have to work hard, and in the end of the week you have to go to school. I mean, that's hard. And if you do not fit in, the companies, they tell you very clearly what they think about your work. And the peers that choose to go to school, I'm sorry to say this, but they live in a protected area. They go to school. If they don't like to go to school, well, they send a message that today they're ill, they're not feeling well, so they stay home, stay in bed. It's not the same thing. So it's really hard. And in Switzerland, we have about, I think, 40,000 young people every year that start a vocational educational training. And we have 20% of these people that quit after a year. And it is because it is hard, because sometimes the matching between the apprentice and the company is not good. But mostly it's because it's really a change of the lifestyle of a young person. It's not that easy to take an apprenticeship and to end it successfully.
So,
and of course the parents, as you said, parents are always the problem. I mean, there's this prejudice. If you want to gain high salaries, you have to have a university degree. We can show with statistics that's simply not true. But tell that to the parents.
And even, sorry, if I could just add to it, and you go ahead after, is it also the guidance counselors in the high schools that also play this role? Because I mean, a lot of the work we've done at the OECD shows that, I mean, yes, the parents is one, but even the guidance counselor who's directing a student, you know, who might be interested in an apprenticeship to say, oh, no, that's, you know, probably not for you. You know, you want to go to university if you want to make a good paying job. Is this...
No, in Switzerland that's not the case. It's quite the contrary.
Okay.
Because university, they would like to have more students from other countries. They already think that the Swiss students are not qualified enough to go to Swiss universities, which is quite exceptional. And the counselors in Switzerland are very important people, and also people that know the business very well. And I think if young people choose to go to a counselor, then they will hear that probably the best way to go forward is to find an apprenticeship. But most often, the young people don't listen to this counselor, or even the parents tell them, well, I don't think that's the right way for you. If you want to be successful, you have to go to university. You have to have a university degree.
Yeah, in Missouri, that's quite different. We do have the challenge with counselors, and actually we partnered with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry a year ago, last summer, so this was our second summer doing this. They created kind of an academy for high school counselors to actually travel the state for a week and actually experience different careers, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and actually see what those jobs are like, see what those opportunities are. And of course we jumped on that, not just from an intern opportunity, but from an apprenticeship and work-based learning opportunity. And we've had a lot of success there. And I think that if we tie it back to, it's not the only variable at play, but if we tie it back to how we were successful with creating over 300 youth apprentices, I think a lot of it is changing the perception of apprenticeship programs, that it's not just for the kids that can't cut college, can't cut military, and that there's real opportunities there for them. And so, but the counselors are a big part of it. Parents are also a big part of it. But it's the idea of pivoting the system to begin to, you know, it's all about paradigm, right? And we're seeing that begin to happen, but it's taken a lot of effort and elbowing.
So I would say, Donald, that there's the other side of that coin is, besides the experience of the apprentices coming in to do it, it's in a company like IBM, and I'd say most IT companies, you have an education of the managers, right? The managers have not been working with this workforce before, this diverse workforce. Their typical worker has been somebody who's going to a University of Missouri, University of Michigan, right, that they've hired. Now they're looking at a workforce that do not have a four-year degree, that are coming in and don't have the skill sets. And one of the things that our managers look for its success where about 95% of our apprentices become full-time IBMers, is that they're looking for individuals with a desire to learn. Because if they can't find somebody without a desire to learn, they will not be successful in a work-based, competence-based program. They have to have a desire to learn, because there's not going to be someone standing over them saying, follow instructions A through Z, and this is your job. It doesn't work that way at all.
Right. One of the questions I had on the IBM programming, I mean, so you know, normally with an apprentice you have a classroom portion and then the work-based. So what proportion of the programming that's offered at IBM is classroom-based? Like, is it 25%? Is there an average across your programs?
I'll give you the DOL guidance. It's 144 recommended hours of annual related technical instruction. So we're a self-paced company, right? We train ourselves. So some of our hours go from 300-400 to 2,000, but it's delivered through a variety of venues. Self-paced online, classroom training, mentoring time and all that. But yeah, it's all laid out in our competency-based.
Because I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is, I mean, one of the other issues we often see is thinking about the kind of the training institutions. So in this case, the community colleges that are offering, and sometimes we maybe see that they're maybe not as flexible as they need to be in offering different programs. Of course, you need a certain number of bums in a seat to offer a program, but are there innovative things that are happening in Missouri or Michigan around training delivery and the community colleges? Anything innovative that you're seeing?
Yeah, so we were able to work with the community colleges to help change the curriculum. And they were able to enroll students outside of the apprenticeship program in our actual program too, which was interesting because you had students that were earning and learning and applying what they've learned at a healthcare institution, but you also had students that were working at a gas station, right? But they were still taking the classes. So that's one community college, Muskegon Community College, but we worked with all three community colleges to align community college curriculum across, which was a challenge on its own because it's not necessarily easy, but in some of our community colleges are a little easier to work with than others. I don't want to name any out loud publicly because I'm afraid it might get out there somehow, but I love all of them. They're all on my board, so I want that for the record, that our community college presidents are great, and they've been great to work with, but really that is it, you know, and I don't think they would have listened to us, but they were listening to the employers through us, right? And I think that's what's important is that, you know, and we found that our community colleges have been a little more flexible lately because it is the employer that's asking for it, and they are developing curriculum for those employers on industries that are a little outside of what we're focused on right now too. So we've got some great partnership with other community colleges.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jacob said it well. I'd say our journey has been a little cumbersome, but it's really that model that we're working through.
Great. So maybe what we'll do now is I think we're supposed to end at 2:30, so we have 5 to 7 minutes. Any sort of questions from anybody to the panelists? Go ahead. I think we need a microphone, but there we go.
Let me give them up.
Thanks everyone for a great panel. How do you, I mean, there is some, it was mentioned this morning by the person from LinkedIn, there is a certain trade-off between these transversal skills that can be used in any industry and learning the skills for a particular company or a particular industry. So how do you deal with the soft skills, with the digital skills? Well, in your case, I assume they're part of the curricula, but I mean, in general, those skills that can be used everywhere.
So for us, actually, it's really about a comprehensive package. And so some of the things that is interesting when we think about the personal skills or the behavioral skills, a lot of that they're getting through this structured on-the-job training. That's where they're learning how to problem solve, how to think critically, work in a team, which doesn't always start well, but it is a journey, right? And so we actually do like that, especially with our youth apprentices, because they're getting out of the classroom and into the workplace, and they're having to engage with others and kind of get out of their comfort zone. So we see that experiential learning component beginning to address some of the behavioral skills, the personal skills pieces.
So we actually, in our standards, we have some training for those. We call them success skills, but soft skills. So the apprentices go through that and identify what those skills are. That's part of every apprenticeship program we have.
And I think too, once you have the basic competencies or the basic skills, a lot of those are transferable among similar industries anyway. I think, I remember the very first Veterans Conference that NASWA put on, I went to, and one of the guys that was on a panel with me made the comment he had done something for veterans, and somebody asked, well, can we get a copy of that? And he said, sure you can, because you know what? We didn't copyright it because we thought if other people use this process, then we all win. And I think that's the mentality I use all the time. But, and I'm sitting here listening to what all these guys have done or are doing, and I think we need to share that message. And there is a concern if IBM is training, 50 potential apprentices, and only 45 of them want to stick with IBM, and so then the other 5 go to some other technology company. Well, you know what? We all win. I mean, we really do. And I think we need to get past that mentality that, these are all mine, because people need to be skilled to take on the jobs of tomorrow.
For us, we worked with a number of employers. We had about 100 employers engaged in a process to develop curriculum around soft skills, because employers told me, just give me somebody who can show up to work on time and pass a drug test. Now, I can't help them pass a drug test personally, but
Oliver wants it.
Yeah. And we didn't want something that was pre-baked, that was, you need to participate in 8 hours or 10 hours or 40 hours of soft skills curriculum, knowing that each individual in this room is different, right? Some of us show up to work at 8 o'clock or 7:45. I might show up at 8:05. And so I might need to actually take a particular course on showing up to work on time, punctual and reliability, and some of those soft skills that are really important. So we're in the process of, we need to test it to make sure that it actually does what we said it's going to do, but there's a pre-test, understanding what areas they need the most improvement in, and then the curriculum's built around the areas that they need most improvement in, and then there's a post-test to make sure that they're competent in those areas of soft skills. Most of it is pre-baked into the apprenticeship programs. Honestly, our community colleges do a pretty good job of incorporating that in there. But the nice thing with this particular soft skills curriculum is we're actually working with the school districts and local school districts to really create it systemic, right? How do we have it in the school system, much like the Swiss model, and then as adults and post-secondary and all of it, so that individuals, wherever they're at on their journey, they can come in and take the same soft skills curriculum and understand what some of those soft skills are.
Here, you want mine?
You guys can share up there.
Can you talk a little bit about how that on-the-job experience was structured? Were the community colleges helping provide some guidance and structure around what that experience was supposed to look like? Certainly they were guiding what happened inside the classroom. In my limited experience with apprenticeships, I've actually got called in to help create that on-the-job experience, because once employers inherited these apprentices, they wanted to be able to standardize that experience, make sure they were checking things off of the checklist of what needed to be done on the job. Do you have any success stories or best practices for how to, formalize that experience to make sure learners are getting from that on-the-job experience what they need to?
This is a great question for Steven, since he's an employer. So.
Thanks. So basically, we standardize our companies, and what we have for all our companies in our mainframe system administration, right, which is, people think mainframe is gone, but it's a skill. We have 20 pages of competencies, and every competency, right, is laid out what the apprentice needs to master. So we actually have a tool that our apprentices will use where it shows the related technical structure that they need to complete, whether it's classroom, e-learning, whatever the case may be. And then for every one of those competencies, so those 20 pages, they will go into this tool and show to their mentor or manager how they achieved that competency. Did they achieve it through taking training? Did they achieve it because they wrote a certain, they showed demonstration of writing some code, or they showed demonstration of understanding of an operating system. And each one of those, they have to show how they mastered that. And that's standard throughout all our programs, so that the mentor is then there to help the apprentice get through where he's struggling, right? But then once he's mastered that, then he moves on to the next competency. And that is pretty standardized throughout every job role that we have.
So IBM's a unicorn because they've taken a lot more initiative than some companies. We work with smaller companies. They don't know what to do. They're intimidated. They're scared. So what we've done, as I stated through our intermediary network, is we stood up the administration and the design and the development of apprenticeships. So we are a USDOL state, meaning we don't have a state apprenticeship system. We don't want one. We use the federal system. And so the federal system works great. We have a great partnership with DOL. But what we've done is we've engaged with our community colleges, our workforce boards, and we've basically helped train them and empower them on how to develop standards. And so usually what will happen if an employer is interested, it's a sit-down meeting, maybe more than one, and you have a member from the community college at the table, you have a member from the workforce board at the table, and then you have a USDOL representative at the table. And they work with the employer to develop those standards. And so, yes, you need the employer to determine exactly what it is that they want, but we might get into the database and look at 60,000 different apprenticeship programs and print out the ones that make most sense and bring them as a blueprint as a starting point. So yes, absolutely are we holding hands and we're engaging, and frankly that's the fun part. We're actually designing some neat stuff that then we can work through to get registered through USDOL.
We have a registered apprenticeship success coordinator. She's in this room right now too. Kelly, raise your hand, please. Yeah, put her on the spot. So she'll work with the employers directly to help walk them through that process. We were talking a little bit about it last night so I could prep for this meeting, because behind every mediocre leader is an amazing staff. Kiosha's here too. And it really was that when having discussions with employers, a lot of them were already doing it or really close to it, right? So they just needed some level of consistency or the framework to follow in order to actually roll through the apprenticeship program. So I'm sure that IBM was doing some things that were very similar to that they just needed the little extra help to actually map it out in that journey of being an apprentice and that earn while you learn model to really help drive that additional support and understanding of how great it can be for the company. So
I think it's a good question, because it also could help in Switzerland to explain to parents why this pathway of vocational training is the best way. Because what we experience is that the companies take over education. It's them that educate young people, that tell them what soft skills are needed and how they have to behave if they want to be successful in the world of adults in the real economy. And I was in my former life, I was a teacher in a baccalaureate school and in a professional school in the vocational training. And I can tell you my life in the vocational school was much better, because I had not one problem with a student. Because if they had a problem in school, companies did act quickly and not with very much understanding, I can tell that. So I think also there, companies, they do a lot for society. And that's what I mean when I say this public-private partnership is benefiting all, even the society. It's the best way to go forward.
We have time for one more question, if anybody has any burning question on their mind. Anybody? Going once? Okay, well then with that, I just want to finish by saying we've actually produced a report at the OECD here on engaging employers in apprenticeship opportunities. We did it jointly with the International Labor Organization. It includes 8 case studies, one of which is on the US, the Urban Technology Project in Philadelphia. So, talking about getting paid very well, we get paid based on the number of downloads. So if you could just go and Google that and download it on the OECD website, we'd be grateful for that. But finishing on that, let's give a big round of applause for our panelists.